Hello. Hi. Welcome to Politics in the Pub. My name's Kat and I'm from Communify Queensland and the New Farm Neighbourhood Centre. Politics in the Pub is here tonight and it's free tonight because of a group of volunteers with the support of the New Farm Neighbourhood Centre who are committed to engaging with our community. Thank you so much for all coming out tonight to join us in what's sure to be an excellent candidates debate in the lead up to the federal election. We're so delighted to see so many of you here, and I think a lot of people are probably still caught in traffic, so I reckon it'll get even bigger pretty soon. Before we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet tonight, the Turrbal and Yagara people. I would like to pay our respects to elders, both past and present. I'd like to take this moment to remember the ancestral lands on which we meet, and to ask all of us here to carry the importance of this history into the conversations we're having tonight, and the future the candidates up here with me tonight are offering us. Tonight is our second of 4 Politics in the Pub events for 2019. Our next event's going to be on August 20, same place, same time, topic TBC. Follow us online to find out more. You can follow us on Facebook or our website. We have a Twitter that sometimes gets used. I need to offer some thanks to lots of people who make this event possible. The Brisbane Powerhouse generously hosts us. The patrons of New Farm, who are a group of generous locals who financially support our community's most vulnerable people and also sponsor this event. And My Village News, who is the local must-read paper for their financial support. I think the My Village News famous Michael is here somewhere tonight if he wants to give a bit of a wave. There he is. I really need to thank the Politics in the Pub committee who offer their time and insight to plan and run these events, and our wonderful MC Rebecca Levingston, who tonight is hosting her 3rd Politics in the Pub. We're so thrilled to be back in her capable hands. Rebecca hosts the relatively early mornings on ABC Brisbane, which makes it even more admirable that she comes out on a Tuesday evening to share herself with us. Please thank and welcome Rebecca.
Now, does anyone have any eggs? If you do, please see yourself to the door. That would be lovely. Let's have a contest of ideas, not of aggression, not of cracked eggshells. 7 candidates for 1 seat. This is like the worst game of musical chairs in the world, isn't it? 5 of those 7 candidates here tonight, so tough odds in what should be a tough competition, an equality contest of ideas. That's what you're here for tonight. Can I get a show of hands? Who actually lives in the seat of Brisbane? Leave your hand up if you're undecided about how you'll vote. Ooh. Every vote counts though, ladies. Lady and gents. Just one lady, yes, okay. Now, can I do my best Anthony Green impersonation for you, just to give you a little bit of background on this seat? Brisbane, key seat, says Anthony Green. Held by Trevor Evans since 2016. Oh, a spontaneous round of applause. Covers the Brisbane CBD, inner city suburbs on the northern side of the Brisbane River. So you got the gateway to Milton, to Stafford Road, Bowen Hills, Windsor, Kelvin Grove, Newmarket, Enoggera, Wilston, precisely where all of the traffic congestion was tonight. Would you give your vote to the candidate who would promise to improve congestion on the roads? Maybe. We got a few cyclists in the crowd tonight, so maybe it doesn't affect you. So this seat has existed since Federation. Brisbane has generally been a Labor seat. Former members include Manfred Cross in the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, Arch Bevis for 20 years from 1990 to 2010. The electoral boundaries then moved and there was a bit of a shift. The Brisbane contest in 2010 was notable for comebacks. The victorious LNP candidate, Teresa Gambaro, the former member for Petrie, held the seat from 1996 to 2007. Anthony gives you a mention here. Andrew Bartlett, the Green candidate, former Australian Democrat senator and party leader, he polled a record Green vote with 21.3%. A second spontaneous round of applause. This is looking good. But even strong flows of Green preferences to Labor were not enough to save Labor's Arch Bevis, defeated by a 5.7% swing. Gambaro added 3.2% to her margin. She retired in 2016, hence Trevor Evans on phone booths in your suburbs right now. I've taken the liberty, candidates, of canvassing your background on social media tonight. We don't want any awkward moments, unless anyone would like to make any declarations up front, because it's better to put it out there yourself than to have it revealed on a seedy video or by an annoying journalist. Any declarations? All right. I'm going to read you out some background details and then give you the chance to introduce yourselves. Our Greens candidate tonight, Andrew Bartlett, is on Twitter. He has 15,000 followers, but he's also following almost 15,000 people. What a faux pas, Andrew. You can't possibly give all of those followers your love and attention. We'll forgive you for that tonight. Would you please introduce yourself and give us the key issue in this campaign for you? Do you have your own microphone? I've got two here. Yes, pass it along.
Thank you. Well, my name's Andrew Bartlett. As mentioned, I've run for this seat before for the Greens in 2010 and also indeed for the Australian Democrats all the way back in 1996, and I've lived here basically all my life. The key issue, having been door knocking around the electorate for well over 12 months, the key overriding issue is absolute disgust at the state of our political system. And frankly, a lot of disengagement and disillusionment, a lot of disillusionment I share, I must say. We really need to fix our broken political system, and that means making it work for the community again, not for the political insiders and the corporate donors and all of those that are part of the political institution and that political bubble we keep hearing so much about. So many of the failed issues, when I went back into the Senate again a couple of years ago, so many of those issues that I was there 10 years or more back had actually got worse, and our political system has failed us so badly, whether it's climate, whether it's brutality to refugees, whether it's stagnant wages and growing wealth inequality, whether it's lack of investment in transport, infrastructure, health and education costs, housing affordability. All of them go back to a political system that doesn't put the community first.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andrew Bartlett. Our second candidate tonight from the Socialist Alliance, Kamala Emanuel. Kamala, you're on Twitter. You haven't tweeted for at least a year. That'll disappoint some of your followers. There is reference to a potato of sorts that you're not fond of. That's your faux pas on Twitter tonight. We'll park that to one side. Introduce yourself to potential voters.
So, yes, I would first like to just acknowledge that we are meeting on Aboriginal country. I'm new to Brisbane. I've been here for a couple of years, grew up in the Tweed area and feel like I've come home because I'm in the area. I think that the most important thing facing humanity is climate change, and climate change and the just what's happened to our society every time capitalism throws off a crisis, whether it's people losing their jobs, people losing their homes, the way we treat refugees. What the Socialists are bringing to this election campaign is a campaign that's aimed at putting people and the environment at the centre of how we run our political life and how we run our economy, so that those needs get met instead of just the needs and the wishes and the greed of the corporations. So we're for something that doesn't prioritise the corporations. We want to see a people's revolution, not of the old kind of, go into the streets, take up arms or whatever, but something that politically transforms our society so that the decisions that are made by us all democratically and made in our interests.
Thank you, Kamala. Ladies and gents, tonight is as much about the candidates as it is about you. So as you're listening to these people who put their hand up to participate in the front row of democracy, we want you to participate too. Think of your questions, short, sharp questions, get the best answers. We'll leave plenty of time for your questions tonight. In fact, in around about 10 minutes' time, we'll be looking for our first questioners, so don't be shy as we make our way along. To the incumbent, Trevor Evans, who's not on Twitter. He doesn't tweet. He does, however, door knock with Wyatt Roy, who is a fairly regular Instagrammer and often has images of him in his canoe, sort of throws your mind back to Malcolm Turnbull and his canoe. They've both been doing a bit of canoeing lately. So by association, you have a social media reputation. But introduce yourself to the folks tonight, Trevor.
Well, thanks, Rebecca, and thanks everyone for being here. Can I start by saying how much of an honour and a privilege it has been to represent the great community of Brisbane in the federal parliament over the last 3 years. We've got a lot done together, both at a local level and a national level. If I was to nominate one issue, it's a difficult one because this is not a one-issue community or town. The issues come and the issues go. Probably the issue that was raised the most at the last one of these 3 years ago was the question of marriage equality, for instance. So what I would nominate actually, in a diverse community like this one, is that it's about the style of representation that's needed and deserved in a community like ours. I've bounced out of bed every single day keen to do it again since I've been the member for Brisbane, and hopefully that enthusiasm and that energy has really been noticed out there. I've held more than 500 mobile offices around the community in the last term. I've met so many of these local people just outside at the Powerhouse markets and everywhere else around the community. And so I think if I could make one big commitment and nominate one big issue, it would be to continue that great style of representation I really tried to bring to the fore.
Thank you, Trevor. Trevor Evans, see how much energy he has? Because Twitter hasn't drained the life from him. And so we come to Labor's Paul Newbury. Now, Paul, you're on Twitter, but you've only got 345 followers. You've made up for that with your Facebook presence across a number of platforms. Now, I had a look and tried to find some awkward moments there. The best I could come up with is you've got a photograph of your family where you've managed to get every single one of your children smiling.
Oh, yeah.
I can only assume you photoshopped that. And you've also got a photograph of you jogging with Bill Shorten and some other people, and you all have appropriate facial expressions too. So I'm just putting a question mark over your Photoshop capabilities. Not too bad in the scheme of social media faux pas, but introduce yourself and nominate the number one issue for you.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. And it's a really great, fun occasion to be here tonight. I really like the idea of being put under the spotlight and answering questions. It's what most candidates do every day. Look, my name's Paul Newbury. I'm the Labor candidate for Brisbane. I live in Barton with my wife Zoe and our 4 kids. I'm a newcomer to politics, as some of you are probably aware. I worked in the energy industry for the best part of 2 decades before doing a PhD, which is in the transformation of the electricity industry to a clean energy economy, so quite a topical area. And more recently I've been working at UQ Business School and University of Southern Queensland. And I think my main issue today, when you have to nominate one issue, it really makes you think carefully, because I, like Trevor, think there are a lot of issues at play in this election. But I have to go back to the fact that if there are a lot of issues and a lot of things that need improving, you can't do that if you have a dysfunctional and a chaotic government. I think that is what we've had for the last 6 years, and I think you can't achieve anything until you get a stable, focused government. And I really have high aspirations for Australia, and in particular Brisbane and South East Queensland. So the only way you can do that is a stable, focused government. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And to our final candidate tonight, United Australia Party's Aaron Whittaker. A clean skin on social media. Well, I couldn't find you on Twitter. You're not on Twitter, right?
I am.
You are?
Yes.
What kind of researcher am I? Perhaps it was the fact that I was so taken by the yellow of your leader, Clive Palmer, who I note in his Twitter bio nominates himself as a living national treasure. I can only assume that you aspire to reach such great heights yourself. Aaron, introduce yourself.
Thank you. That is the idea. So thanks, Amanda. Firstly, I would also just
My name's Rebecca.
Oh, sorry.
Were you just getting me back?
No.
Because I couldn't find you on Twitter?
No,
that was
sorry.
a good move.
That was a mistake on my part. Sorry, Rebecca. Firstly, I would just like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land as well. My name is Aaron Whittaker. I live with my partner in Kelvin Grove. We've lived there for quite a number of years, and I've been in the Brisbane region for all of my working life. myself, I am a Justice of the Peace. I've been a Justice of the Peace for around about 20 years. I'm very involved with the community, as a lot of you would know, and my passions include inclusiveness and diversity. That's something that I'm very passionate about. I think for myself, and probably hopefully people in the audience here, the reasons why we're here is because we're a little bit disillusioned with the way the government has been run, and Paul said 6 years. I'll raise him and say the last 12 years, because I just don't think they've been doing a very good job, and there's quite a number of reasons for that. So for myself, I like to think that you can never trust a politician, and the good news is I'm not a politician. So I would like to bring to the table, as Rebecca said, a clean skin, and hopefully we can bring some ideas and thoughts to government, and we won't be persuaded by the lobbyists and the big businesses that have done that in the past. I think it's a little bit disappointing that we have governments in place, the current one and the one before that and the one before that, and they sit by and they let the large fuel companies collude with their petrol prices, with their ridiculous weekly fuel cycle. I think something like that should be illegal. And then they've sold off all of our electricity assets, and then they sit by and watch 400% increase in electricity. And the list goes on. There's so many things that I think that this government hasn't done a very good job of doing. Infrastructure in our cities, major cities, Brisbane and the other two major cities as well, hasn't really been addressed. We've had a large amount of population increase, and we really haven't had the infrastructure being put in place to handle that additional load that's come in. So that's something that I'm passionate about and I want to try and address. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. I'll find you on Twitter. So, ladies and gents, in a couple of minutes, there are 2 microphones on the floor here. If you could make yourself known to here's our gent and here's our lady, because it really is about you guys asking the questions that you want to hear answers to. Lovely to see people up on the balcony again as well. Hello. I am going to ask one more question to each of you, and then I think we'll dive straight into audience questions tonight. And I've written down a range of sort of topic areas that have been nominated as priorities. But I want you to choose one of these items, and I don't want you to talk at length about it and why it's important to address it. I want you to say, if you're elected to the seat of Brisbane, what is the one thing that is at the top of your agenda list that you actually want to achieve? A piece of change, and whether it relates to something like increasing New Start, something relating to the environment, whether it's coal mining or electric vehicles or solar power. If you want to address homelessness, these are the issues that people in this seat have identified to us prior to tonight as priorities. Whether it is on changes to tax policy, to negative gearing, whether you want to give a specific group or industry in society a pay rise, whether it's childcare workers or aged care workers. If you win the seat of Brisbane, what is the one thing you will do in the next 3 years? Andrew Bartlett?
The one thing I would do, which would assist in addressing many of those other things that you talked about, goes back to my core point of fixing our broken political system. It actually goes to the point that Trevor made about the style of representation. We need to empower the community to have more direct say into the issues that affect you directly. Because it doesn't matter who you elect, none of us have all of the answers. We need to do much better at hearing from the community, empowering the community, and part of that, which is a key policy change, is getting rid of corporate donations and putting a cap on all political donations and getting big money out of politics altogether.
So no corporate political donations?
Absolutely not. Indeed, the Queensland Greens already have taken that approach for the last few years. But we can, and it's our policy, and already putting this forward in the federal parliament, to put a cap on all donations, so you can't get your Clive Palmers or others that are independently wealthy, and a cap on election spending. So it's not about who's got the biggest bank balance. It's about a genuine community engagement.
Should there be real-time transparency with political donations in this country at a federal level?
Absolutely, and I will give some credit to the state government here after a lot of pushing from the community sector and parties like the Greens that we do have much more rapid disclosure. We do have lower disclosure thresholds. We do have at least developer donations banned. It goes further in New South Wales, and that was something again the Greens led the way on. But we can go and need to go a lot further. It's one of the key reasons. Stopping the revolving door of people between Minister's office and lobbyists and ex-politicians. It's one of the reasons people are so cynical about politics.
Okay. Kamala, the Socialist Alliance. May 18, you win the seat of Brisbane. What is at the top of your list of things to do? What will you achieve in 3 years?
Well, I would accept only the average worker's wage and use the money directly from that to contribute to the grassroots community campaigns for change. So the most important things to me are that we build the kind of people's power movements that in the past did things like getting troops pulled out of the Vietnam War, that at the moment it looks like we'd contribite to building a stronger climate justice movement, a stronger refugee rights action movement, stronger unions, because it's our grassroots community campaigns that is where real change comes from. And so our priority would be empowering those movements to reach the point where we have a new kind of democracy that it's people in those, people in our communities making those decisions about the things that affect us. So it's less tangible than I'm going to introduce this piece of legislation, but and be more than happy to put forward a whole lot of really good pieces of legislation. But the most important thing is seeing the community empowered to start making the changes that we need in our society.
Do you think politicians are paid too much?
Yes. No question about it, because it's a form of institutionalised, although not illegal, corruption that when you provide to a layer of a society too much money, they adopt the outlook of the very rich, and so that's that along with corporate donations, which Andrew has identified. They're part of the way that you transform the way people see the world and aren't making decisions like raising Centrelink. Like if we had to live on a lower income, if our outlook was the income of the poor or just the ordinary working person, then the decisions that we'd be making, the decisions that would be made in Parliament would be more likely to reflect the real life situation. Like if you've got someone who owns a lot of houses or is a developer or aspires to sit on a board of directors after they've left Parliament, then the decisions that they make, the policies that they implement, the laws that they make are going to benefit them. And so we see, corporations being able to pay less tax. We see corporations being allowed to get away with, climate disaster. These things it's a part of the institutional corruption of politics that people adopt the outlook of the big end of town.
Okay, Kamala, on minimum wage and donating to grassroots causes. Trevor Evans, if you're given the privilege of holding the seat of Brisbane again, what will you do in 3 years?
The next biggest thing that's on the horizon here for our community here in Brisbane and more broadly in southeast Queensland is in the next 12 months or so, the details will be inked on the southeast Queensland city deal. And that will be the biggest city deal that any federal government has ever entered anywhere in Australia. And if it's done right, it will secure the investment pipeline for all the infrastructure that we're going to need to keep this city moving as it grows into the next few decades. There is a huge amount of infrastructure being built around this city right now, but quite frankly, the planning horizons have been much too short. And so I'll be putting my effort into making sure that the business cases for the next wave of investment are as funded and as complete as they possibly can be, ready to go off the shelf. And we're not just talking about about car and transport infrastructure. We're talking about public transport. We're talking about cycling infrastructure and the next wave of green bridges that are going to be needed here in Brisbane. And most importantly, and this is something I think which sets me apart from other candidates, if I'm successful, I will have the Brisbane River and its catchment catchment included in the South East Queensland City deal so that this region's biggest environmental asset counts as infrastructure and its future can be secured through the funding that it deserves.
So what does that mean in practical terms if the river is included in the catchment?
So there is a significant proposal that's been prepared not just by the South East Queensland Council of Mayors, but by the Natural Resource Manager, Healthy Land and Water in this part of the world. They believe that in order to get Brisbane River and the catchments in South East Queensland and Moreton Bay back up to scratch in terms of water quality and really protecting and preserving what is our biggest environmental asset, it's going to take a significant financial investment from all three levels of government over the space of a decade. That plan that they've drawn up is called the Resilient Rivers Initiative. It is a significant investment, and I believe that it's only likely to be brought about in a structure like the South East Queensland City deal that's coming.
So is that a concept, that's a federal concept, or it's a state government, or it's a local government? How does the motivation for that work?
The way that a city deal works is that it brings all of the levels of government. That means the planning that's able to be instituted by the local government. It means the road networks controlled by the state government, and the funding that the federal government can bring to bear are all combined into one big agreement that brings all of the three levels of government together to cut through the bureaucracy and the partisanship that sometimes impacts on infrastructure investments. And by bringing all three together in an agreement, you really cut through all of those sorts of issues that can politicise infrastructure priorities.
Okay, the South East Queensland Plan for Trevor Evans. Paul Newbury, ALP, 3 years. Is this your first tilt at politics?
This is, yes, I've described in the AFR as the political novice.
Well, get out of the gates and go. What are you going to do in 3 years?
Look, I imagine there's many people in this room, if you accept the science of climate change and you accept that there's an urgency about acting now to turn it round, and you accept that the cost of action is much less than the cost of inaction or delay, then I hope that you are in agreement with me that we need to do something now, and we need a government that is prepared to actually take serious action. Now, in many ways, I feel like I've just arrived on the scene at the right time with the right skills. Now, as I said, I worked in the energy industry for 16 years. I started a PhD. I was doing it while I was working until I got the opportunity and the invite to spend a year at Cambridge and Oxford and INSEAD in France. And that was too good an opportunity to turn down. So my wife and I packed up the kids and off we went. And that was a great experience, and it really it taught me to look from on a global scale about what was happening, not just what was happening in Australia. And so I came back and finished my PhD. Part of that PhD, I was invited to go to India to look at the challenges there. I was invited to go to China. So I guess, so when I had the opportunity to run, it seemed very obvious that I would seek out Mark Butler and Bill Shorten and explain what I thought I had to offer. And so I very much want to be at the table next to Mark Butler, who hopefully will be the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, as we navigate these challenges and take all the stakeholders on a journey and to develop a sensible plan to a transition to a clean energy economy, because I also believe that Queensland is the best place in Australia to launch that revolution. And so I'm speaking with people every day from the renewables sector and storage and the sector itself, and so I have high hopes. And also in my PhD I also partnered with the CSIRO and their the chairman of the Future Grid Forum, so I think that I'm well qualified to offer myself in that space.
Paul, should the Adani coal mine go ahead?
Okay, so this is a very contentious issue. So I'm very comfortable to say that, I mean, there is a standard line that everybody has been saying, which is that it doesn't go ahead if it doesn't stack up economically and financially. I look at this issue as on a much bigger scale. I think what we need to do, and what Tony Burke has indicated, is that the Environmental Act federally does not consider any climate impacts. So when we do environmental approvals, we don't have any consideration of those things. So I'm very comfortable to say that we need to review that act, and that we need to decide as a nation what are the environmental regulations and requirements that we need to set for projects that into the future. And once we agree that through an expert panel, then we need to hold projects to account, whether they be Adani or any other project, whether it's coal or gas or steel or anything else. We have to decide what we want from an environmental policy, and then we apply that. And so I see it very much as that's the issue that I need to solve.
I'm still not clear on whether the Adani coal mine should go ahead.
If the Adani coal mine stacks up environmentally and financially, it'll go ahead.
Can a new coal mine stack up environmentally?
Look, I personally have doubts. I was reading an article by John Quiggin in The Guardian last Friday, and he outlined a case. Now, the reality is I'm sceptical, but it's up to the company to prove that the financial viability and the environmental viability, and to this date they haven't, and so I'm sceptical.
Thank you, Paul. Ladies and gents, one more candidate and then we'll go to your questions this evening. Aaron, first time, 3 years, you're in the hot seat, May 18, you and the National Living Treasure are toasting. Clive is saying, congratulations, I always knew you were my guy. What are you going to do?
It's a tough one. I was thinking here, I had so many different topics I wanted to talk about, and we'll get to a lot of those later, but I thought I would start with NBN. So firstly, I'd just like to say that I work for one of the world's largest technology companies, and the following is my opinion and not that of my current employers. So now that we've got that out of the way, the NBN, I'm sure everyone would have an opinion one way or the other on what an absolute disaster it has been. And that would be one of the things that I would strive to see whether we could try and point it in the right direction. 3 years, not a long time to try and change something like that, to move something like that. So that's what I would look to do. Firstly, we had Tony Abbott, who went in and made policy decisions around bandwidth without even knowing what the word bandwidth meant, which I think is totally ridiculous. $55 billion has been mentioned a lot during this campaign, and what a waste of money it was. We could have been world leaders in what we went out and did and what we delivered. And then Tony Abbott and the Liberals went and made the decision to buy the copper network off Telstra. Telstra must have been absolutely laughing. Absolutely one of the worst deals you could imagine in Australia. They paid $11 billion for a worthless, rusty old copper network that Telstra was quite prepared to let rust in the ground. So I'm going to be passionate about that. That's the type of things that I'm going to bring forward. We will review the Senate inquiries into the failure on the NBN to make sure that we put in whatever plans that we go forward with to make sure it's a more reliable and faster system. Because did you know by 2030, they say this stat all the time in my industry, and they say that by 2030, 85% of jobs that will exist have not yet been invented. So what are those jobs going to be? It's going to rely a lot on technology. So we need to be thinking about future-proofing this system to make sure it's there for your children and for your children's children. We need to be looking 50 years into the future. Just like the Telstra copper solution that was in place for 100 years, this NBN solution should be something that's still around in 80 years and 100 years.
Can you, in simple terms, explain what that solution might be?
No, I can't. And the reason is because it needs a lot of planning and a lot of understandings of the failures that have been put in place beforehand. There's hours of Senate inquiries that have gone into the failures. So to sum it up here in 2 minutes as to what the direction is, I'm not going to make that call and look like a fool, because there's people have been made a fool before by making claims like that on such a very large network. So I can't make that claim.
Okay. It's good when a politician or an aspiring politician, if they don't have an answer, don't just talk. That's a good thing. Ladies and gents, it is your chance to talk now, to ask questions. I'll channel my inner Tony Jones. Not too many long rambling comments. A short, sharp, specific question is great. Let's start up the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Russ Robinson's my name. I'm a local from New Farm. I might have seen you down the Coles supermarket in the last few years. seems to be the hive of activity there at the village. But I was very interested to hear what Paul has had to say and the Labor Party has had to say in relation to the climate change and being on the front foot with that. And my question goes to not style, it goes to what everyone is thinking. Well, I think a lot of people that are thinking people should be thinking is about the droughts, the fires, cyclones, and the water crisis. Now, I know Paul's got particular qualifications in that, and I don't know of any other person in Australia that's standing, and I might stand corrected on this, that has got qualifications, that can contribute. So what I'm asking you, because I've got a number of relatives that have been affected in Townsville, for example, with the floods, and I want to know what the Labor Party is going to do, or Paul yourself, how you can contribute to solving this climate crisis that we've got. And there's many aspects to it, I know, but one of the main ones, just to be more specific, is the water one. So we want to know what's going to happen with water and with the dams, because people are saying, oh, just build dams and it'll be okay. But there's many cities around the world that are now running short of water.
Okay, so extreme weather events and water management. Have you thought deeply about that?
Wow. Look, all I would say, I mean, I clearly understand that floods, droughts, cyclones, a whole range of weather events seem to be more frequent than perhaps they were when I was a kid. And I think there's enough evidence out there. Now, I'm not a climate scientist, but I accept the IPCC report that, we're in a stage now where we need rapid action. Now, from a Labor Party point of view, I'm focused on the issues around lowering emissions. So that's to address that climate issue from an Australian point of view, and also on, I guess, transitioning so that we actually build those new industries so that Australia can actually become a leader in its region and export across our region. And I'm very encouraged by people like Ross Garner, who wrote the original. It was the original sort of reference on climate change, and he said recently that he believes that Australia, the Australian continent, is of all the developed countries, is the best place to take advantage of clean energy and to develop, be the natural home of high energy intensive manufacturing. And so I really think that we need to be really aspirational in what we think we might be able to achieve. We're doing, so it's not just, so I'm very comfortable that we can deal with the emissions side of things, but also I'm keen to have Australia, return to a place of credibility on the world stage so that we get taken seriously. Because I don't think that's the case now. I don't think, with respect to Melissa Price, she's been thrown in at the deep end, and I imagine it's a tough job. But you have to be able to influence your regional neighbours to take action, and I think that if we show a path to others that others want to emulate, then that can actually have an impact beyond our own borders in terms of climate.
I'm just going to throw that to you, Trevor Evans, as well. And a two-part question for you. Do you see a link between climate change and extreme weather events that we're experiencing right now? And do you think the Adani coal mine should go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Russ, for that question. And in answer to the way that you just interpreted that question, I want to give an absolute assurance that the conversation in Canberra in the Parliament has moved far past questions about whether people do or don't believe in climate change and its impacts. The serious focus of the conversations in Canberra have been about how we can competently manage the transition and bring to fore the policy suites that Australia needs to continue to meet and beat its international agreements in terms of the targets we set. And there are a couple of scoffs around the audience just before, and I want to add that to the comment that Paul just made before about Australia and having a credible policy or a suite of policies when it comes to climate change. And I want to double down actually and refer to the fact that there are political leaders and other parties in the Australian contest at the moment that go so far as to say that Australia doesn't have a climate change policy. Well, can I say, a simple quick 3-second Google search quickly dismisses those sorts of allegations. Australia has a strong suite of policies, and they have meant, and you can have some confidence given, the 15 years of history that we can now bank on. Australia is one of the few countries around the world that has signed up to some of the largest targets and has continued to meet and beat its targets under those international agreements. We met and beat our targets under Kyoto 1. We're about to smash our targets as they become due in June next year under Kyoto 2, and we're on track to meet our targets under Paris as well.
Okay, ladies and gents, the candidates are here tonight to share their views with you. We need to show a level of respect back and forth on the stage because you want to be able to hear what they have to say. Adani, should that coal mine go ahead?
Yes, well, now that it has received the final approvals and decisions that it requires from the federal government in terms of those environmental approvals, and on that basis it should proceed. I just want to also add one additional not a qualification, but additional information that people need to bear in mind. Paul sort of implied it in his answer. Keep in mind in Australia that mines receive only minor approvals from a federal government. They receive their major approvals and indeed their licence from state governments, and that's always been the case. In fact, there has never been a federal government in the history of Australia which has stopped any coal mine. In fact, I'll go further than that. There's never been a federal government in Australia's history that has stopped any mine on mainland Australia. And the point there is that the major approvals, the powers, lie with state governments, and that's why it is now over to the state Labor government to decide the future of that mine.
Okay, just one more short response from Andrew Bartlett on this. Off the back of Russ's original question, can a coal mine stack up environmentally or economically?
Look, of course it can't. I mean, of course we need to improve our federal environment laws, but when I mentioned before about all the things that were worse now than they were 10, 15 years ago, there's one I won't mention now that I think is worse than anything, but the second most one that we've comprehensively failed on is climate change. I mean, there were Senate committee reports, there were commitments from the Hawke Labor government to act on climate or global warming, and time after time we've done nothing. And you don't need to have a generic comment about each individual mine. All of the scientists say, particularly because we haven't acted for so long, no new thermal coal. Keep fossil fuel on the ground. Don't open up huge areas of fracking in the territory in WA and massively expand all this fossil fuels in the atmosphere. And we've got to transition for those communities. If you don't even acknowledge that that's going to happen, you're actually failing those regional communities by not putting in place the transition plans that we know have to happen if we have any hope of avoiding dangerous climate change and all of the disruption, whether it's climate disruption and those weather emergencies, whether it's the social disruption, whether it's the lost jobs in regional communities. Of course you can't have new thermal coal mines. It's just crazy. And, why don't people just say it and move on with it?
Okay, I can see lots of hands up, so I won't go through each candidate on each question, but let's try and pick up the pace now. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. I have a hypothetical question for Trevor Evans. Sometime in the future, another country launches a brutal and unprovoked attack against Australia. The war goes badly for us. The frontline approaches Brisbane, and you have no choice but to flee. With you is Grace, your 3-year-old neighbour's daughter. Her parents died when a bomb hit their home. You grab Grace and rush to Manly. You arrive at the jetty, and there's only one boat left. It's about to leave. You can see the soldiers, you can hear the tanks. The captain yells, "Hurry, we're going to New Zealand." You hand Grace up to him. He points at your wrist and says, "I can save you both, but you'll have to give me that Rolex." Trevor, do you pay?
I think so. Yes.
Okay, let's move on. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Darren Mew. I represent a company called Blue CHP. We're a not-for-profit affordable housing company based in New South Wales and Queensland. It's a good point. I'll be quick. 116,000 people on the streets, homeless every night in Australia. 87,000 households in Queensland in housing stress, at risk of being homeless. Chronic underinvestment in social and affordable housing in Queensland and nationally. What's your positions on A, can we solve homelessness in Australia, and B, should there be a national housing strategy?
Okay, I'm going to give that to Aaron. As you talk about the NBN and the connection of technology, some people are struggling to find a safe and secure place to rest.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. Thank you. So there's a number of initiatives that we will have once we get into government, and that is related to housing affordability. So we have a couple of initiatives for that. So the first one is to be able to remove... sorry, hang on, lost my thought. The first one is for home loans. We want to be able to make them tax deductible. So that's going to help open up a whole market of younger buyers and younger purchasers to be able to afford their first home, because they're really struggling with that. So that's something that we want to introduce. Another initiative that we have is we want to introduce bullet trains for the major CBDs for 300 kilometres around the CBDs. So that's going to help with the housing affordability. You can still get into the CBD in under 1 hour on a bullet train and come to work. You don't have to work in the city. You don't have to live in the city, and you can still work in the city. So that's another initiative. Another one is we want to help spread some of the work out into the regional areas. We have a number of initiatives for that, and that's going to put downward pressure on the cost of affordability in our capital cities that we have. And yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, Kamala?
So thank you very much, and thanks for the question. So I guess there's 5 things that I would say we would do for the Socialist Alliance. The first is building the community campaigns for housing, which our local council members have been very involved in places where we've got local council members elected. The second is campaigning to increase the corporate tax rate and the tax on the very rich, so that there is money we've been starved for decades of the kind of money for infrastructure. And you mentioned the lack of funding for affordable housing. We would like to see an expansion of public housing. And the third is making it so that, I'm sure everyone knows, there is more vacant housing in Australia than there are homeless people. So we want to change that. We want to make it so that at 6 months of being vacant, you have to show cause for why it shouldn't be made available. We want to cap rents at 20% tops of people's income. We want to cap mortgages at the same, and we basically want to see an end to speculation driving housing costs and make it a service that is a right for people to live with dignity.
Thanks, Kamala. Okay, it's a bit hard for us to see up here, so I can't tell if it's male or female questions, but if there's a female questioner...
Yep.
Hello.
Hi. So in coming years, Australia is going to have a huge increase in the number of refugees coming to our shores. Many of these are going to be seeking asylum because of sea level rise and ecological collapse due to climate change. This will be from inaction on climate change that has already happened. Yeah? So irrespective of policies we put in place now, we will have these climate refugees that Australia is directly responsible for. So I want to know from all of the parties, mainly Labor and Libs, how will you address the needs of these people when they turn up on our shores?
Okay, Trevor Evans.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's a good question. Australia currently has a humanitarian refugee program, which is far larger per capita than almost any other country in the world. And it's a huge credit to governments that have been able to grow that over time. At the moment, it stands at about 19,000 people per year, and that's up from about 13,000 people per year, which it was some years ago when our government was first formed. So there's been about a 50% increase over the last 6 years in the number of humanitarian entrants that have been coming into Australia. The decisions about who and priorities are made by the department under really firm guidelines recognised by the United Nations in terms of who comprises the most needy people around the world at any point in time, and that changes over time depending on where the flashpoints and the crises are around the world. So for instance, about 2 years ago, when the war in Syria was in full swing, Australia was able to take in an additional on top of our annual cohort, about 12,000 refugees from the Syrian community over there. In fact, some of them are locals here in New Farm. If you get to know them, they're fantastic people. And I guess the point that I'd make is that if other developed countries around the world had a humanitarian intake that was as large as Australia's per capita, the world's refugee problem would be significantly under control in 1 to 2 decades.
Andrew Bartlett, this is an area that you've been passionately interested in for decades now.
Yes, I have. And look, it's another area where things have got worse in the last decades. I'd say as an overarching principle for this, as with any policy area, no policy solution is appropriate if it involves deliberately inflicting massive suffering on innocent people, and that's what's been happening and continues to happen. I presume the point of the question before about the Rolex, etc., was basically then that person is now a people smuggler, and someone fleeing a war zone is actually would, if under Australia's policy, arriving here would be potentially locked up, as we have done, and torturing people for years. That's the outcome of it. I've, in the previous parliament, went to Nauru 4 times and saw the human cost of that prolonged, indefinite detention. There are people living in this electorate, hundreds of them right now, on temporary visas, bridging visas, with total uncertainty about their future, living in fear that what happened to that family in Biloela will happen to them, and they just at the crack of dawn suddenly find themselves locked up with their kids in Melbourne or in detention elsewhere. That's got to stop. Now, this is a complex issue. I'm not saying it's a simple one, and I think refugee advocates need to acknowledge that as well. But the least we can do is close those terrible camps, stop wasting billions of dollars on really dodgy contracts, bring them here, regularise all of those people, the thousands of people who are living in this community now that do make great citizens, as Trevor rightly pointed out, and then work collaboratively with countries in our region, as Malcolm Fraser did all those years ago. What this current government done is actually stop taking people from Indonesia.
Okay.
Provide them with other pathways. That is the only approach long term.
So a significant policy shift, the demand from Andrew Bartlett. Trevor saying Australia's pulling its weight internationally. How does Labor's approach on this topic differ, Paul?
Yeah, look, like the way I approach this issue is, so I've got 4 kids and my youngest daughter is 8, and I don't want in 20 years someone to say to her, gee, that was a terrible stain on Australian society, that period where we treated people so badly. Now, I understand that Scott Morrison says that people smugglers don't understand the nuances in Australian policy, but I can tell you what, that people in this electorate, and particularly Liberal voters, understand the hypocrisy of what went on about that medical evacuation bill. I had so many emails about that, and so I'm pleased to say that whilst Scott Morrison has announced that they're capping for the next 3 to 5 years the refugee intake at 18,000, we've announced that we're going to increase it to 27,000 per annum by 2025, and on top of that, we have a program called that is a community-sponsored program where we will have an additional 5,000 each year And the program which I'm getting Shane Newman to come and speak at, I think at Communify, will be about how local communities can actually play a part in repatriating families and these people. So you can actually have a part as a community. And on top of that, we've announced that we're going to give an additional $500 million to the UNHCR to address the regional issues about refugees and asylum seekers. We're going to immediately take up the New Zealand offer to repatriate 150 people a year. And I think there's an additional 600 that are still left from the United States offer. And so I guess from my point of view, there is genuine action in that space. And so the bottom line for me, and I have people ring me all the time and they say, and it's a great question, it's like, what are you doing to get these people off Nauru and Manus, because indefinite detention is just unacceptable, and I absolutely believe that as well.
Okay. Hi there.
Paul, my question is to you, because this is the nitty-gritty that everyone in this room interested in climate change can do something about. If you're elected as the member for Brisbane, when will we see the first community battery supply for groups of, say, 40 houses that are all feeding off our solar panel, so each of us are contributing to the reduction in greenhouse gases?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so look, I mean, I can actually, you'll be pleased to know that we do have a community renewables program. And I've just done an announcement that's about to come out. I'm still waiting for it to hit my Facebook about exactly that issue. I announced it with Mark Butler immediately after our campaign launch on Sunday. So I can give you some details fairly quickly about that once they come through. But at this stage, I can't say much more. But it absolutely addresses the issue that you're talking about. Yeah. So
can you just? So are you saying Labor's policy would be community battery supplies for...
No, I'm saying that there'll be funding for community-based renewables projects, so that might be community groups or, like, say, your neighbourhood centres or a range of things like that. What we're trying to do is put in 10 renewable hubs, and so we've announced 4, one of which is going to be in Brisbane. And the idea that Mark Butler explained to me is that we want to trial lots of different projects, see what types of projects that the communities want to put up, and we will fund those, and we will take the learnings from those, and then we'll tweak those and we'll expand those and announce the remaining 6 across other centres across Australia.
You better call Mark Butler and say, mate, we've only got a week and a half left in this thing. People want to know the detail of things like that. Great question, thank you. There's our mic.
How much have you studied our climate change situation, and do you feel worried about the huge difference between what needs to be done and what's happening in the global economy?
Is that a question for me?
Well, let's keep swapping it around. Kamala.
So I had what I think it might be George Monbiot refers to as your oh shit moment, when you realise that climate change is bad, but it's so much worse than you thought. Back in about 2005 or 6, so just after the scientists started to be talking about the accelerations, that it's not just linear, a little bit more carbon dioxide means a little bit more warming. Once they started to talk about those feedback mechanisms and the way, once it gets out of our control, we could lose the whole thing. And I do worry that there is a chance that we just won't make it. Like, there is a chance that civilization will go. And the fact that for decades, globally, we haven't been doing anything serious about it is a serious concern. I helped to set up a couple of climate action groups in the last couple of decades, and have been involved in trying to build the kind of grassroots community call for action on climate change. I strongly believe that we need to make immediate changes and have a rapid transition to get 100% of our renewable energy 100% of our stationary energy from renewables within a decade, and that we need to transform the whole rest of our economy, from housing to public transport to everything you can name, so that we can bring greenhouse gas emissions down to zero, and even go beyond it to be able to try to stop the runaway climate effects.
Sure, Aaron.
All right, thank you. It's simple, guys. The answer's in the title. Global warming needs a global response. It's a global responsibility, and we need a global solution. So we want to be part of that, and we have some of the answers to put forward for that. So if we take a look at China and India, they combine for over 1,400 coal power stations, and they've got another 1,000 which are coming online within the next 4 or 5 years, guaranteed. So that's going to happen. So if we want to have an effect on what we do here in Australia, we only have 6 coal-fired power stations. So if we change them, it doesn't make much of a difference. We need to work with China and India on that. We really do. It's a global problem. China has 75% of the world's solar electricity that they generate, and we need to work with them to make sure we can do the same. If we put solar panels in the Sahara Desert, we would only need to cover 1.6% as an area, and we'd have enough electricity for everyone in the world annually. So we need to definitely take a look at solar. And if you vote with United, we will bring online green capacity that's cheaper electricity, that's green, clean, non-carbon within 1 year, and it will be non-coal solutions that we'll be bringing forward.
A question from the gentleman in the audience regarding Clive Palmer and coal mining and opening up the Galilee Basin.
Okay, so we'll go to that. So what we have, as I mentioned about India and China and the coal mines, and the coal-fired power stations that they have at the moment, right? So if we go and stop all mining, all coal exports in Australia, what's going to happen? Those power stations are still going to get coal from elsewhere. They'll get it from Indonesia, which is brown coal, which produces 3 times the amount of carbon emissions. So by cutting off a coal mine isn't going to fix a global problem. The demand for electricity is there. So like I say, we need to work with China, we need to work with India to make sure that when we do finally turn off the coal mines and coal electricity, we have another option. And at the moment, that's just not there. But we're going to work towards that, absolutely.
Aaron, can I just check, what did you say about solar farms in Central Australia?
In the Sahara. So it's obviously a very big land area that's unused, very sunny. So 1.6% of that, if that was covered in solar panels, that's enough electricity that would be generated for all of the world's needs. It's not that big.
Can I ask if the Sahrawis have something to say about that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, there are people, and I think we've in Australia we've had enough experience of people saying there's a terra nullius, it's unused land, it's not people's land. I mean, I'm not saying don't have solar power. I think we need it, but I think we need to be respectful of Indigenous peoples, whether it's in Australia or elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, let's go back to the audience. Yes.
Thank you. I wonder if this question could go to each of the candidates because it's actually very quick. And I'm just seeking to understand the candidate's local activity. Who has actually taken part in this year's local Clean Up Australia campaign? Thank you.
Okay, let's go from left to right. Did you take part in Clean Up Australia Day?
I did, actually. I was at the Tenerife Progress Association down there, and I took my wife and my 8-year-old and my 10-year-old son, and I think we came back with the most stuff. We even came back with a crate that we found in a park somewhere. So the kids had a great time, and they're already asking me when I can go back. So it was great fun, and any opportunity when you're on the campaign trail, whether it's a fete or anything else that you can take your family, it is always a great day. So I'm happy to come back.
Now you can open your own hipster cafe as well. Great. Kamala, did you clean up Australia?
Quick answer, no.
Andrew?
Done lots of cleaning up, but I didn't go to that particular event.
Aaron?
Not that specific day, but I did clean up a beach at Easter time.
Yeah, 3 sites for me. I don't laugh, it's a busy day in the community. I started in Spring Hill, then I went to Brecky Creek, and then I was up in Grange Forest Park. And I just do want to also give a quick plug for a little community group that I help fund called the Brisbane River Cleanup. It's a small family business funded through Healthy Land and Water. They are in the Brisbane River in a boat all of the time, cleaning plastics and pollution and rubbish out of the lower Brisbane River catchment before it gets out into Moreton Bay. And I just, a couple of days ago, announced another 3 years of funding for them.
Yes.
My name's Anita Wyndham and I'm from Windsor. At this election, I've predominantly heard about climate change. My question has nothing to do with climate change, because there is more to do with running a country than climate change. I'd like to ask, I might give you a little, very brief, my situation. I am divorced. I'm an empty nester. I am currently saving, or trying to save, so that I have a good nest egg in my retirement. So my question is, what policies, whether you get all of them to respond or just pick a few, what policies have you got out there that is going to, one, assist me now, and then also help me to save for my retirement, which for me, because I've just had a prolonged illness, I'm expected to retire earlier than the average person.
Thanks, Anita. And thanks for sharing some of your personal story. Andrew, would you like to take that?
Sure. I think that goes to an overarching theme which is relevant for many of the questions people have asked, which is around not just people's individual wealth, but the adequacy of and affordability of social services across the board. And what we have at the moment, as we all know, is a real crisis in regards to many aspects of our health system, in regards to people being able to access and afford dental care, in regards to affordable housing long term. Our overarching approach has been not to get involved in the tax cut auction, to openly support higher revenue raising by getting further revenue from big corporations and the wealthiest, and ensuring that that is able to be properly invested in social infrastructure. Alongside that is ensuring that the income support, the so-called social safety net, which I don't think people use that term terribly much anymore because it barely exists, it's had so many holes put in it, is restored properly. The issue of housing that came up earlier that I didn't get a chance to respond to, I won't do that now, but you know, the whole problem of not just affordability of housing, but security in regards to being able to stay in your own home, appropriate funding of aged care, something that really hasn't got the attention it deserves. There's a whole range of different policies there, but they all come down to ensuring that people, no matter what their circumstances, are able to have the basics accessible and affordable in their community, and also to ensure that those people who should be paying more of their fair share don't keep dodging that responsibility and leaving the rest of us having to pay more.
Aaron, the United Australia Party has talked in the past about raising the pension. What else is your party interested in doing to look after older people, people in retirement and pensioners?
Yep, so to look after older people, there's two policies that would apply. We're looking, as I said earlier, to have the tax-free home loans, so I'm not sure if that would apply to the older lady, but maybe not if the home loan is being paid down, but that is one of the things that we're looking to introduce. And also for pensioners, more importantly, is we're looking to have an increase of $150 for every pensioner every week. It's a $4,000 annual increase.
All right, Trevor.
Yeah, I heard a question about trying to save, to invest, to get ahead. And I want to say, they always say going into each election that the major parties are the same, you know, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. The choice between the economic policies for people who do want to save and invest and get ahead is probably the starkest going into this election as any election in the last 30 or more years. What is proposed by the opposition, and Andrew Bartlett put his finger on it before when his answer went straight to revenue raising, would be the largest increase in government, a more than 10% increase in the size of government, if you measure the size of government by how much it taxes and spends. And fundamentally, that's a choice about whether you think that you're better off saving that money and keeping it, or whether you believe that government is better off taking it off you and spending it on your behalf. For everybody who wants to save like you do, and to invest like you do, and to get ahead, the choice that's proposed by the opposition and by the Greens would shut in front of you every single gate that has been open to every generation before you in terms of the options that you have to save and get ahead.
Paul, I'll give you a chance to respond to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, so what I take from that, so you're looking to save, so that means cost of living pressures you need to deal with, so you need to have more money in your pocket, and you need to have options to invest in. So clearly, if you said you had some medical issues, so investments in hospital and medical care, dentists, things like that. Labor has already said they'll protect the pension, whereas in this last 6 years we've had the asset test for pensioners changed, which ended up seeing a reduction in the pension for 370,000 people. I think we have an energy supplement for pensioners. And also, I'll just remember one thing. If you're saving, just remember that Scott Morrison wanted to change the retirement age to 70, and he was blocked in the Senate. So if he wanted you to work another extra 3 years.
Okay, back to the floor. Yes, sir. Yep.
With China refusing to take our recycling anymore, what are each of the candidates going to do both locally and nationally to solve this recycling problem?
Kamala.
So there's a principle that we're in favour of is attempting to get rid of inbuilt obsolescence. We want for manufacturing of products to include an end-of-life use. So after something's created, that it can be dismantled and reused, or that it can be recycled. So we want to see recycling occurring in the community, but we should be also thinking about reducing the irrational demand that gets generated by advertising, so that people are just buying rubbish that's just made of plastic and crap. So we want to have reduction in the production of useless things, and production to meet people's needs, and then the capacity to recycle it at the end.
Okay. Give anyone else particularly passionate on this issue? Two people, Aaron and Andrew. You go ahead, Andrew, and we'll go to you, Aaron.
Look, just quickly, I mean, not surprising, the Greens not only are strong supporters of, but have actually been leading the way in regards to putting forward practical ways to increase recycling. But I do want to really emphasise, and actually goes to that question earlier about Clean Up Australia Day, we actually need to reduce the amount of waste dramatically. Even if we could fix climate change tomorrow, we're going to end up drowning ourselves and poisoning ourselves in plastics and chemicals and all sorts of other waste. And the only way to be able to do that effectively is by regulating and putting controls on excessive packaging in particular. We recycle better what we can, but we've got to reduce the amount of waste for starters, because otherwise we'll be chasing our tail forever.
Aaron?
Thank you. When I was young, I used to wonder about the way we dealt with products and like plastic and glass, and I could never understand how you would have a Coke bottle, a glass one, and you would just throw it away in a bin and smash it, and then it goes through the system and comes out the other end. And you go to a pub or whatever, you have a glass, it gets washed out and gets reused. And in some other countries, they do reuse Coke bottles. And I often wonder why something so simple like that would help save the consumption that we have of all this plastic and this endless waste. And so being able to introduce policies around being able to reuse products like that seems like such an obvious and simple thing. We don't throw away a cup at home every time we use it, a glass one. And I don't know why we have to do it in society either. So one of the things we would like to do is we would like to, obviously, as the question was up the back around recycling and China refusing to take it, is we'd like to set up some industries here in Australia to help deal with that, and it will have to be like regionally done, so on a state level, but working with the federal government as well. And there is a couple of small startups that I've seen where they're starting to process plastics and the other recyclables, and we really need to take that nationally because it's not happening and it's just building up. It's ending up in trash anyway, even when you put it out in your recycle bin, and we really need to look at it and address it. It's not happening.
Okay, back to you. Hello there.
G'day, my name is Ross Pittman, and I'm amused that you're all talking about and discussing these issues, which are very important issues, but yous are all parts or members or representatives of political parties. Which one of yous are actually going to let the people have their say and bring in an electronic citizens-initiated referendum that goes directly into Parliament so that yous may do the will of the people instead of doing the will of your party?
I might go to you on that, Andrew. You've probably got more experience in Canberra than anyone else here. Do you think the will of the people is done in federal Parliament?
No, I don't, which I think I addressed to some extent in my answer to one of your earlier questions. I mean, one of the reasons I've spent so long in smaller political parties rather than join the bigger ones is obviously not because I wanted to guarantee a career in politics, because you join a big one and make sure you had the best chance. It's because I believed in more diversity in ideas being put into the political system, and also because both the parties I've been involved in, the Democrats and then the Greens, when the Democrats disappeared, had a core commitment to participatory democracy. Now, and I was at a small forum last night actually, which are exploring all of the different ways, particularly now technology is in place, to better enable people to contribute and have a say in the issues that affect them. I don't explicitly say that the Parliament should just be this bunch of automatons that just sit there and rely on ticking whatever box an electronic online petition tells them once you get a certain number. I don't think that's sufficiently engaging all of the different viewpoints and enabling a proper discussion to happen. But I think there are many other things we can do, and I guess one of the things, having been in Parliament, is you get much better of an idea of the resources that are all available, most of which are used to promote the politicians or to promote the political parties, and could be rearranged in a way that gave people more of a direct say. Concepts like participatory budgeting, for example. Your politicians, your representatives are representatives. So it still have to have that final decision, but there can be far more informed decisions, because one of the other things that's really learned from being in Parliament is so much expertise in the community that we don't draw on, that are basically locked out of the process, and it's left to those that are the insiders, part of the institutions, the corporations, the lobbyists, those that are the donors. And we can do so much better. So I don't explicitly support what you suggest, because I've explored that sort of stuff with all those sort of different participatory processes. But I do think we can do much better. And if you look at the one example where our political system has failed comprehensively over a century plus, all political parties, all parliaments, it's in regards to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been failed continually time and time again. And that's because they don't have a say. That's why issues like the voice to Parliament and more directly listening to, enabling Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have informed consent over decisions that affect them is so critical. That's that principle that our political system frankly dismisses, and that's the most stark example of it.
Trevor, I just want to throw that to you as well as reasonably fresh meat in Canberra. As you enter and exit the Canberra bubble, if in fact that exists, what's been your impression over the last 3 years in terms of being able to give or bring the voice and the will of the people to the nation's capital? Have you been able to do it?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. And always a worry using the phrase fresh meat around New Farm, let me tell you. An inside joke for some of the crowd here. Look, no, on a serious topic, I've looked at some of those participatory democracy concepts as well. And there are a few countries around the world very different to Australia that try to enact them. And I'm not sure that they are the way forwards. I think that the best way forwards is maybe something that connects a little bit with the opening words that I used here today. And that is about trying to ensure that the representatives you have are as visible and as accessible and responsive and thoughtful about the issues that confront you as they can possibly be. That's exactly what I've tried to do, and that's why so many people have seen me out in the community, just constantly being available, listening to people and passing on their ideas. Don't undersell the achievements of this parliamentary democracy that we have. It's one of the oldest parliamentary democracies, one of the oldest continuing parliamentary democracies around the world, and broadly speaking, it has served our country pretty well. And I also want to say, don't just assume that political parties churn out, identical politicians all in the same mould. I say that as somebody who has been probably on more front pages of newspapers and in the news more often for not towing the party line and being able to achieve things inside a party system by being a good representative and being as persuasive as I can inside a party room and inside a government.
Thank you, Trevor. Yep.
Don Perrott, Trevor. First of all, thank you for your efforts on same-sex marriage and standing up in the community, but I want to touch on the economy. The Coalition always tells us how great they are at managing the economy, bearing in mind that we still haven't got a surplus after 6 years, a projected one. We've got zero inflation rate, we've got the deficit more than doubled, and the Reserve Bank went today very, very close to dropping interest rates to the lowest ever. How credible is that statement that you are good economic managers?
Well, I think all of the things that you just described typify the challenges that many Western democracies have out there in the world. Some of those economic statistics that you stated are equally true of a whole lot of countries, including the US, the UK, the other G7 economies. What you can say is that over the course of the last 6 years, the budget situation has been turned around. You make the point that the budget surplus is a projected one. Nonetheless, we're operating in that financial year very, very soon, and the budget has been turned around from a huge deficit to a much smaller one. Australia currently has the highest economic growth of all of the advanced economies, with the exception of the US. And on a whole range of economic measures, it shows that we are doing well. But you're right, there are huge challenges out there in the world, and it reinforces the need to ensure that good management of the economy and good budget management stays a priority for Australia going forwards.
You want to respond, Paul? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Look, I'd like to answer that one. Anyone remember two guys called Hawke and Keating? Anyone remember what Keating did? He basically made modern Australia through some of the amazing things that he did. I think that's widely regarded, even by Peter Costello and many of the people in the LNP. Now, the one time in the last, so that era finished, and then in the last 22 years, Labor has been in power for 6 years. So only 6 years. The one time that we were in power, we had the GFC, and we were widely regarded as being the benchmark example of how to deal with such an event. Go hard, go early, go households, and our Treasurer at the time was rated the best Treasurer in the world. Now, when the Liberals took over, the Coalition took over government, our national debt was 176, it's now about 360. They didn't have they didn't have a global financial crisis. So I'd like to know what's their excuse for doubling the debt? We had an excuse at least.
Okay. Go ahead.
My name's Anne Boccabella. I live in Kelvin Grove, and I wanted to extend the question about women. I know we've talked about housing, affordability and where they can go, but it's much, much bigger problem than that. We know that 50 and above women are now the new homeless, and they're homeless because they cannot get jobs. They can either not get back into the employment arena after having children, or they've been in a domestic violence situation, been forced out and have had no resources. It used to be that TAFE was a wonderful place for them to go. There was a second tier in TAFE that would re-educate these people and get them back into the workforce. That has gone. There seems to be no avenues for these women to find a way back into the workforce and to actually make a living so that they can support themselves. I have so many friends I worked with 40 years ago in places like Foreign Affairs and Defence, and they have nothing. What can we do to help these women at every level, either in education, getting them back into the workforce, supporting them in there, protecting them in there, to keep them in their homes, all of these things that we need to do.
Thanks, Anne. Was there a specific person on the panel you wanted to respond, or are you happy to hear a couple of responses? I'll go to the woman on the panel, Kamala.
So I'm really glad you asked that question. The issues confronting women confront women of all ages, but clearly that older demographic, as you say, is the group who are most the new homeless, we do need to have preferential treatment of women in homelessness as well as others escaping violence. We also need to enact legislation to enable the victims of domestic violence or the survivors of domestic violence to be able to stay in their homes rather than being the ones who are the first ones to leave. Obviously, for those who decide to leave, and generally it's not really a decision, it's not really a choice, it's essential, but we should do everything we can to help them stay in their homes, and a massive expansion of public funding for public housing is a part of the solution to the housing question. And then there does need to be affirmative action in employment, and we're in favour of funding again for expanding TAFE, making education at every level free again, and for action on equal pay. We keep on winning it, but not quite winning it. And so we need to take action on the gender pay gap, which means things like we do need to guarantee money for when you've got a kid. Sorry, the words just escaped me. But maternity leave, we need to ensure that women don't lose out when they're out of the workforce because of looking after kids, and we need to make sure that jobs that women dominate in are paid equally to jobs that men dominate in.
Okay, I'm just going to bounce along. We'll give reference to the Labor Party today. Tanya Plibersek was a guest on my program this morning, the Shadow Minister for Women. She announced funding for a new TAFE on the north side of Brisbane today. In order to keep things moving along, I just want to go to you, Trevor Evans. In this election, Jane Prentice, the member for Ryan, got bumped for Julian Simmons, endorsed by the party. A number of high-profile women have left the Liberal Party. Is your party doing enough to support women in politics?
Well, look, I think it's really important that the success stories are celebrated as much as the instances that you raised just then. Believe it, people are laughing, and that means that they need to know more about the fact that the LNP here in Queensland has more female representatives than we did 3 years ago at the start of the term, because Senator George Brandis was replaced by Senator Amanda Stoker. And going into this election, we've got more women in safe seats, which means we'll have higher female representation after this election has come and gone. And I want to give a particular shout out to one candidate, a very good friend of mine, Angie Bell, who's been pre-selected in the seat of Moncrief. If she is elected, she will be the first openly lesbian woman in the House of Representatives in Australia's history.
Okay. Down the back.
Hello there. This is open to any candidate. I'd just like to address that throughout the night. The idea of savings, the economy, and climate change have all been brought up, and I'd just like to submit that these things are they're not best addressed at an individual level, but that are addressed at a systematic level. So I'd like to just ask, have all parties undertaken efforts to properly assess the impacts, the cost of inaction on climate change? And also, have these parties really gone to address how we will begin the transition for a just and sustainable future for all? Thank you.
Andrew.
Well, short answer, yes, and slightly longer answer. It is a really important thing to make sure these discussions are intertwined rather than have climate change out here. It is linked to the issues of the previous questions in regards to economic management. You cannot separate them. We have to retool our economy that's one for the future. And to go to one of the previous questions, look, I think one of the most, it's a very stubborn myth, and it's understandable why the Liberal Party would continue to push it, but the idea that they're good economic managers, I find is extraordinary. And it is precisely because all of those issues that have come up, whether or not the issue about TAFE funding, about homelessness for women, about the difficulty of maintaining in your own home, it's the end result of what we now all know is the failure of neoliberalism, which has put individual pursuit ahead of the good of the community. it has meant that long-term things like the health of the planet that we've all got to survive on just doesn't count. And what counts is the 3 or 4 year economic cycle. They have to be all fully taken into account. We don't have this myth of the trickle-down economy, we all know is rubbish. We've got a hoovering up at the moment where more and more is going upwards. And meanwhile, not just is the wealth inequality going, but the life support systems, the whole plan, not just climate change, but pollution. The report that came out just in the last couple of days about massive loss of biodiversity, the loss of all those insects that, you know, could really genuinely affect the sustainability of life on this planet, the chemical pollution, the pollution in our waterways. None of that is being factored into economic management. And if we don't do that, it is going to come back and bite us really badly. And that is the same thing when you're talking about inequality. Time and time again, if you look all around the world, when that inequality gets too bad, when more and more people, like we're seeing in the States, maybe their economic growth numbers are great, but their inequality is getting worse. People are working 2-3 jobs and still can't stay in their own homes. They sure as hell can't afford healthcare if they get sick or anything else. Those things have got to be factored in. It's not just about a set of numbers, beautiful or otherwise. It is about all of us together, and that includes, of course, the future of our natural environment. And that is something that is totally missing from almost every aspect of our political debate.
Aaron, I might go to you on this. Much has been made of the United Australia Party spend on advertising in this campaign. Have you looked at the cost of inaction on climate change?
Absolutely. What we want to do is ensure that your children and your children's children have a future in this country. And the way we're going, as everyone here has sort of indicated, we're teetering right on the edge. The Great Barrier Reef, that's a great example of where it's falling over everywhere we look. There's a Darnie, I'm not going to mention that, we'll leave that where it is, we'll park it because it'll come up later, I'm sure. But when we look at the Great Barrier Reef, we need to have accountability for what goes on in government. And it's just been swept under the rug. And I'd like to know whether Trevor would like to answer the question as to how $500 million, $500 million was given to an organisation that didn't ask for it, didn't have the resources to deal with it, for the Great Barrier Reef, and they gave it to 4 people that are ex-Liberal ministers. How is that possible? Where's the accountability there?
Trevor.
Well, first of all, that's a complete mischaracterisation of what happened in that case. And with or without that $500 million, it's worth pointing out that the numbers don't lie. This is the government that has done the most programs, the most funding to ensure that we protect the Great Barrier Reef. That's our very proud record. And I want to talk about actual results, not just about rhetoric. When we formed government a few years ago, the Great Barrier Reef was effectively listed on a watch list by the UN Heritage Committee because of dredge spoil sites proposed for it and a number of other huge threats to it. It was my government and our funding and our strong record on protecting and preserving the Great Barrier Reef that meant it is off that watch list, and we are now lauded as one of the countries that is doing the most around the world to protect marine ecosystems.
Paul.
Yeah, look, in another life I was a head of internal audit at a large multinational, also a large state-based government-owned corporation, and I can tell you there is no way that you would hand out $600 million before and a sod had been turned. If anyone's built a house, has anyone handed over all the money before anything's even been done? Just doesn't happen, right? So in terms of good governance, that is a million miles away, and the audit office in this country said so, but it was brushed under the carpet. So if that is the standard that we set, then we're in trouble, because we cannot allocate money with such a loose process, and it rightly got called out.
Can I respond to the question?
Kamala.
So I'll try to keep it brief, and I'm really glad for your question. I think the question of system change is a really important one, and also what is the cost? Really, it's incalculable. What we will lose if we don't act on climate change is threatens civilization. So there's, as well as all the other species, right at the moment we're in a new period, the Anthropocene, in which it's the next extinction event. We're already losing species at a rate greater than it's been in recent times. It's a new extinction event. We're on the brink. and we really need to make a difference. We need to create a whole new system that's economic and political and social and cultural, that puts human beings and our relationship with nature at the centre of our decisions, instead of a system that's based on what's going to most profit the corporations. And while I would rather a Labor government than a Liberal government, we've just got to see they're both been, for decades, since the 80s, part of this neoliberal push to privatise, to reduce taxes, and to not spend on the social infrastructure and the ecological infrastructure that we need.
Thank you all. I think we got everyone in response to your question then. Okay, I'm not sure where the mics are. We've got hands up everywhere. Go ahead. Hello.
Thank you very much. My name's Marion Hegarty. I've got a question in relation to the NDIS. When that was first brought in, I think that had tremendous support from the Australian population. As I understood it at the time, we were talking about funding in the long term that would involve some increase in the Medicare levy. Subsequently, that was, as I understand it, scrapped. With an argument that we've got enough, we've got enough in the budget, we're doing well. And that may be all very well for a particular year, but it makes me concerned about the long term of, all this bit about economic management and having to fund so many different things. How are the most vulnerable in our society going to be looked after in the long term, not just the short-term funding?
Thank you, Marianne. Paul, I might go to you on that, because it was a former Labor Prime Minister that championed the NDIS.
I mean, obviously I'm not the government, but I can say that it was Julia Gillard's government that brought that in, and that was, I guess, one of her most proudest moments. And also Bill Shorten had a lot to do with that, and Jenny Macklin as well. Now I guess the disappointing part, and we see very much the opportunity to return to government to fix the work that we started, because I don't think it's really progressed the way that we wanted it to go. Now, clearly putting a cap on staff at 3,000 or whatever it was, when in fact we already knew that the staff that was required was going to be 10,000. What that meant was we were always going to underspend the budget. And so we actually have people in need that have been assessed, but just don't have the opportunity to actually get the packages that they need. So I just really, it's not an area of my specialisation, but it's very clear that we are itching to get back at that to fix that's unfinished business for us.
Trevor Evans, why was there a significant underspend on the NDIS?
No, so with a big project like the NDIS, it's really important, firstly, to say how much strong bipartisan support it has enjoyed right from its inception. And I'm very pleased to say that, as was alluded to in the question, my government has ensured that there wasn't a need to raise additional excises and levies to half fund it. We've been able to sustainably manage the economy and the budget so that the NDIS is now entirely able to be funded through consolidated revenue. And that's a really, really important step, and it reinforces how ultimately all of the things that we want and all of the things that we aspire for are best serviced and best realised when you have a strong economy that can achieve these things and fund them. And all of the things that we aspire for and all of the things that we yearn for are most at threat when there is a weak economy and weak budget management that means that the money isn't there at the end of the day to pay for them. Now, in terms of the NDIS, in terms of the NDIS, we hope when the NDIS is fully implemented that it will cover about in excess of 400,000 people. At the moment, it covers about 250,000 people and growing. And the thing about the NDIS is it has been bipartisan policy to ensure that we push it out as quickly as possible and ramp it up as quickly as possible and not be too overly cautious to get it perfect before we roll it out. So I just want to respond to these constant interjections about underspending. There are a whole series of areas in a federal budget where what you do is you anticipate as best as possible what the demand's going to be, and you guarantee that the demand is met irrespective. And so for you to interject and talk about underspends, you must, to be consistent ensure that you also yell out and say, oh yeah, but you also met the overspend that came through the public hospital system when you undercatered for that one. This is normal budgeting process. Every single person who gets assessed for the NDIS, the money is guaranteed to be there, and that is a proud bipartisan achievement of the federal parliament.
Okay, Andrew Bartlett, I'll just give you a final response on that. And again, ladies and gents, the candidates are here tonight respectfully to share their views. The respect needs to go both ways from the audience as well.
Can I just, in as non-partisan a way as possible, say in regards to the NDIS, and when I went back into the Senate in 2017, somewhat unexpectedly after all the citizenship stuff that people would recall, and immediately went about, I better find out what all the issues are and talk to people and get a bit more of a closer idea. And even when I was talking to people about housing or about employment or all sorts of other things, that kept coming up was the NDIS and problems with it. And most of what I'd heard of it to them was like, well, there'll be teething problems, but it sounds like a good thing, a lot of extra money, extra individual catering and tailoring to what people need. So I just genuinely say there's certainly an issue in regards to the adequacy of funding, and that's why I keep repeating my core point that being openly committed to raising sufficient revenue so that you can adequately fund, which is about ensuring that everybody has an equal opportunity to get ahead. It's not just it's not a welfare measure, it's enabling equal participation. It's an anti-discrimination measure, it's an equal citizenry measure. But the other thing I would say is, even apart from funding levels, is I think there are serious problems with the model and how it's designed, which is once again a bit like our employment services network, that private providers that can find ways to use the system to make big bucks and to cut what the needs of individual people are is a real problem. And that's something whoever is in government, they're going to need to work at. And one of the key aspects of how we work at it, which gets back to the other key point I've made, is we need to have more people who have the lived experience of disability having more direct say into how it make it work better. It is, I will give some credit, it is working well for a number of people. It's been a good thing for a number of people, but particularly some of the complex cases, it's not giving them more choice, it's making it less choice, and somebody else is telling what they can and can't have, and that's not how it's supposed to work. So that has to change, regardless of how much money is put into it.
Okay, a brief reply, Trevor.
Not a reply. I just want to say one quick thing to demonstrate my sincerity and my dedication to the NDIS. A lot of people who have been watching closely will know that I am a strong supporter of the charity known as Young Care, which does a fantastic job grabbing young people who are disabled out of aged care and other inappropriate housing solutions and finding them dedicated, fit-for-purpose accommodation that helps them to be truly independent. When Scott Morrison became the Prime Minister, and he visited Brisbane for the first time, I took him to Wooloowin House in Young Care, and I talked him through the opportunity that existed through the SDA component of the NDIS to ensure that we can turbocharge the building of more suitable accommodation to grab young disabled people out of aged care and put them into fit-for-purpose housing. And it's been one of my most successful wins so far to date as an MP, that the rules have been changed around that SDA component, and now Young Care, in conjunction with ethical investors, will be turbocharging the building of new suitable accommodation for young care. It is going to completely revolutionise the housing opportunities for those people into the future.
Thank you, Trevor. Yes. Hello, front row.
Hi. My question is about New Start. So New Start hasn't risen for over 25 years. There's been mention of increases to pensions. It's not enough to live on at the current rate. And the inequality and poverty across Queensland and across Australia are appalling. The Raise the Rate campaign is calling for $75 a week. The APN is asking for an increase of $100 a week, the Anti-Poverty Network. The Business Council of Australia, the Country Women's Association, and even John Howard support this campaign. So this is just a direct question to you. I don't really want to hear about reviews or we'll look at it. Will you raise the rate?
Aaron, let's go with United Australia Party first.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, in regards to the age pension, yes. New Start, not sure. Sorry.
Trevor.
New Start raises twice a year on top of additional top-ups that we give, like the $75 that people on New Start have only just received. And I want to say something additional about this. People who are on New Start are those in the safety net who have been assessed as capable to work. And the very best thing that you can do to ensure that those people have the security and the dignity that they need is get them a job. And this government's achievement is record jobs. There has never been a year as big as last year for the creation of jobs for people, including those who were previously on Newstart. Over the last year, more than 1,000 new jobs a day were created around Australia, and case by case, story by... Yes, I'll take the interjection. The vast majority of those, more than 90%, were full-time jobs. It is an amazing record of achievement, and it's one that is making a huge, huge change and difference to the lives of many people who were previously on Newstart.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, yes, Sam? Okay. The gist of it is the lady in the front says this is the meanest welfare we've had in the history of the country. You've had a go, Trevor, just in terms of promise on jobs.
Just briefly, Australia has one of the most generous safety nets around the world, and Newstart is only one component of that. Okay, we should be proud of the welfare nets that we're able to provide in this country compared to almost every other country around the globe. Newstart, there is rent assistance, there is Medicare, there is access to free and affordable medicines. There are so many additional components to that welfare net that need to be taken into account.
Andrew Bartlett.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry, but it's just not true to say that we've got one of the most generous in the world. Another in the list of things that is way worse now, and that point which people wouldn't have heard is so many people have been pushed off the disability pension, off sole parent pension, onto Newstart who shouldn't be there just because they're paid less, way less, and that gap has got more and more. The waiting times for Centrelink, which you just want to try and call them up, is insane, and it was bad in the middle of last decade. It is deliberately, I'm certain of this, deliberately made to be a horrendous ordeal for people to engage with Centrelink if they're unemployed.
Okay.
But the core question is, and it is an important one, of raising the rate, and yes, the Greens are committed to raise it by at least 75%, and going again to listening to the people that actually have the expertise in the community and deal with this every day and see how severe that poverty is and how much impact it causes all of us as a society. We have said how we will pay for it, and I will also say in terms of an investment, to spend that money in increasing Newstart is a far better use of that much money than giving that much money in tax cuts to the wealthiest. That will go straight into the economy.
Okay.
It will help the retail sector far better.
Kamala, you said if you got elected, you'd decrease your own pay packet. Would you increase Newstart?
Absolutely, absolutely. It needs to be above the poverty line. It's just it's a shame. I mean, a real serious shame that we have people living below the poverty line in such a wealthy country. We need to tax the corporations and the very richest people in this country, so we've got the money to pay for a measure like this. We're in favour of restoring the corporate tax rate to what it was in 1988 to 49%. And we're in favour of not getting rid of the top, amalgamating that, getting rid of that upper tax bracket, but retaining that upper tax bracket and put it 70% for those, amounts above 180,000. Like we really want to have the money in our hands to be able to resource the community. There should be a living income for everyone. I mean, so raising Newstart as a first step and a living basic income for every person in the country to live with dignity.
Paul, under Labor, will Newstart increase?
Sorry, could I just one other quick thing is scrapping the GST, which is a regressive tax, which hurts the small person the worst.
Ah, that wasn't a small thing. That was a big thing.
Big thing. That's a big thing.
Okay. Paul, under Labor, will Newstart increase?
It's been self-evident for a long time that it hasn't been enough. Labor will increase it. We just need to work out by how much, okay? But in addition to that, we have just announced that we're going to give an additional 30% tax cut to small businesses who employ people who are trying to get their first job and they're under 25, or over here the lady who talked about elder women, carers or people over 55 who are returning to the workforce will also we'll give an incentive to the businesses of an additional 30% tax deduction on top of the salary tax deduction to get those people back into the workforce. So I would hope that the incentive to employ people under 25 coupled with an increase to New Start would actually go a long way to helping those people.
All right, ladies and gents, we're about 2 minutes away from when we should wrap up. So I'm going to ask one last quick question, a short response, and then a final comment from each of you. Tomorrow morning on my program, my guest will be the new Managing Director of the ABC, David Anderson. Got the tick from Ida Buttrose. He yesterday said that if a coalition government was re-elected, it would guarantee cuts to the ABC, it would guarantee job and program losses. A brief response from each of you. If elected, do you think the ABC funding we should have more, less, or is it just right? Trevor Evans.
The budget and the numbers handed down by this government last year, 1.04 billion. This year, 1.05 billion. Next year, 1.06 billion. Those numbers are going up. The ABC gets good funding from us, and talk about cuts is incredibly misleading.
I don't want to take up too much time, but it fundamentally, there is a cut to ABC funding under your government. But if you see it as going up, I guess the answer is no more funding for the ABC.
Do you have different numbers?
Aaron.
The numbers are clearly going down. That's what's happened. I'd really like to question what happened in the last year with the sacking of the board members and whatnot for the ABC. I think there was some shady work that went on there, and that's what we need to have in this parliament, is accountability for Parliament. Too often we see all this shady business that happens, and that's what we want to have, some clear transparency into activities like that.
I don't want to make it too ABC-centric.
I have the budget numbers here in front of me.
Well,
the numbers I quoted are right.
Over the course of triennial funding, yes, but in terms of ABC funding overall, in terms of the output that we are providing, the budget, the allocated funding is going down. But anyway, Andrew Bartlett.
Sorry, I'm still recovering from the shock of being told funding for the ABC has been going up. It's look, again, no surprise the Greens are strongly in favour of better funding for the ABC, and again it comes back to that issue of, do you want more tax cuts and maintaining all the tax breaks for the better off, or do you want to have more revenue available for something that benefits all of us? And the ABC is still, by every single survey ever done, the most trusted news source, and some of us might complain from time to time about various stories and all that sort of stuff, but it's still more respected in regards to that than any other news source in the country. And to not just cut the funding but politicise it is, I think, even worse. There's supposed to be, and this applies to a whole lot of appointments, government appointments, to all sorts of boards and tribunals and stuff. We've got to stop all those political appointments. We've got to have independent, transparent appointments to these boards. But the other point I just wanted to make very quickly, news and current affairs and all that is important, and something that hasn't come up tonight that I just wanted to make sure was mentioned is the importance of the arts and culture more broadly, and that is a key part, again, of the ABC. Australian voices, Australian stories, Australian culture, Australian creativity. It's not just a nice feel-good thing. Again, it's an actual economic driver. It's an export industry to the world. So I've got some friends of the ABC signs in my campaign office in the Valley there. If anyone wants to drop in and sign some petitions, you'll certainly be able to do so.
Kamala, again, you gave yourself a pay cut. You're going to raise New Start. What would you do ABC funding?
Increase it. Kind of simple. Yeah, I think we need to have a good public broadcaster that people can tune to. I'm totally all for stopping with the political appointments, because I know there's this whole discourse going on that says the ABC is this lefty place. I don't share that view.
And Paul?
Look, the ABC's been part of my life as long as I can remember, and it's part of my kids' life. So we've already made a commitment to restore the last $83 million that was taken out, so clearly we're not about to take any out.
All right, ladies and gents. This is the third Politics in the Pub event that I've been privileged to be part of. What a credit to Communify, to the people who stick around for 2 hours worth of quality debate and a contest of ideas, whether you agree or disagree, been surprised or challenged tonight. What a valuable experience. Could you please put your hands together for all of our panellists tonight? And thank you so much. Here's to election parties on May 18.